All right, hello. This is David Potter with blanalytics.com and also with rockchalktalk.com. This is the first episode of a series I'm doing called Sports Done Smart, where I'm hoping to kind of engage some people in conversation about looking at sports just beyond, the way we normally talk about them, beyond just the normal talking points that we hit. And I'm overjoyed to have as my first guest on this series, Mr. John Gasaway from ESPN, their college basketball stats guru. I really appreciate you coming on this morning, John.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to kick this off, or I guess I should say tip this off. It'll be fun.
Yeah, not a problem. So just to kind of give everyone a background, the way I got in contact with John was with a piece that I wrote a few weeks ago, which was sort of in response to something that was written and posted on 538.com by Matt Giles. And it was essentially talking about Bill Self being slow to warm up to the kind of three-point revolution that we're seeing in college basketball. And, his three-point attempt percentage typically lagging behind other teams, and how this year with a lot of good three-point shooters, he's starting to, I guess, come around and starting to shoot a little more. And my response was more directed at the efficiency of certain two-point shots that can be overlooked sometimes, and the success that Bill Self has had over the years without much three-point shooting. And that has kind of led to a lot of back and forth between me and other people on Twitter, but also got me in touch with John, who was quoted a few times in the article. So, John, I guess my first question for you would be that, given the newfound popularity of the three-point shot and the completely valid data behind it being more effective than the two-point jumper, do you see any limitations to the efficiency of the three-point shot, and could we be overlooking some of the benefits of certain two-point shots, especially those taken around the basket?
Well, the efficiency of the three-point shot is, unhappily for coaches, it's limited and it's conditional. You have to make them. The beauty of the two-point shot is it's easier, other things being equal, depending on the defense that you're playing against, to get in a position where you've got a good chance of getting that shot in. There's no particular value to missing a three. It's still a miss. And that's not what offenses are designed to do. So it's not as simple a case as saying you should shoot more three-point shots or be like Curry and the Warriors. If you can't make them, there's no virtue there. And you could even imagine a simple 2x2 matrix where you can or cannot make threes and you can or cannot make twos. Obviously, if you can make twos and you can't make threes, then your recipe is go for the twos. And I know that sounds like a simple point, but you see basketball teams faltering on the simple decisions like that. And Self, of course, is in the very happy position of, he's got players who are marvelous at both kinds of shots, and we see the results. It's a magnificent offense again in Lawrence this season with the Jayhawks.
Right. And I know that the criticism, I guess, that's been out there of Self, and it was louder earlier in the year when Kansas offense was in more of a slump, and they really weren't going back to or they weren't increasing the number of threes that they were taking, even though they're one of the better three-point shooting teams in the country. And I know that there are a couple of quotes, and I'll let you kind of explain where you were coming from in the article by Matt Giles. But you had made a remark that Self's not really adjusting to the abilities of his players, and do you still feel like that's the case, or do you feel like that was not necessarily the point you were trying to make when you were quoted that way?
Well, historically, up until this season, Self, or I should say coming into this season, when no games had been played, Self led major conference coaches in the statistical constancy of his three-point rate. And I think at the time I did that, I was looking at coaches who have been in the same major conference gig for the past 5 seasons, if I'm recalling correctly. And Self just, edged out Bob Huggins, who is also very constant in his three-point rate. Self, of course, always shot more threes than guys like Roy Williams, to take an obvious example, who never shoots threes. Fran McCaffrey, another example that people might not be aware of, shoots fewer threes himself. So it's not as simple as Bill Self does not shoot enough threes. It was interesting to me analytically that his rate was so constant as players came and went, as good three-point shooters came and went, as bad three-point shooters came and went. That was intriguing to me. Then this season, as we all know, the three-point attempt rate went up, and it's exactly at the Division I wide average, which is at a all-time statistical high. In Big 12 play, about 35% of KU's attempts were three-pointers. That's a healthy attempt rate, and so one hazard of our business is that you're writing about things as they're happening, and as the whole three-point debate was happening, and Curry is being Curry. Self changed too, and again, the proof is in the bottom line. It's a statistically great offense. Iowa State's was a little better in Big 12 play, but Kansas has a defense as well, easily the best team, and yet another conference championship. So a salute to Bill Self.
And you've mentioned Steph Curry a few times, and that kind of leads me to something that I've wondered about some of the emphasis we've seen on the increased three-point shooting in the college game. Is that teams like Golden State, teams like Houston have kind of locked into that theory that more three-pointers is better. And I think a lot of the data we get on the efficiency of certain types of shots comes from the NBA because there's a larger sample size. But you also, obviously, you have much better shooters in the NBA, you have much better players.
That's a key point.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, as I look at the teams that lead Division I in three-point attempt percentage right now, you have to go all the way down to, it looks like 17th in the country in Michigan to find a major conference team shooting that high a percentage of their shots from behind the arc. It's mostly mid-major and low-major teams who are shooting the most.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if, maybe some of that emphasis on the three-point shot is coming from data that we've gathered from the NBA, where there is an increased talent level, and maybe it doesn't necessarily transfer as well to the college game. Not that it can't transfer to more offensive efficiency, but it's maybe not as effective as at the college level as it has been at the NBA.
Now, that's an excellent point, and I apologize for the noise coming outside of my door. I'm in a hotel room in Bristol, Connecticut, and there's heavy-duty maintenance happening right outside. I'll do my best to talk over it, but the three-pointer makes sense if you've got Curry, because his three-pointers go in. There's no evaluative bonus for shooting lots of threes and missing them. It is a contingent and conditional conundrum that we're trying to crack here. And the question is whether the three-point shot was just kind of regarded with suspicion, for a really long time, because it was something relatively new that was introduced now almost 30 years ago. And there's probably a natural, if the distance of the three-point line is at such and such a point, and the ability of the players is X, then there's probably some, point at which those lines intersect, and you say that this is a naturally occurring healthy three-point rate. Are we below or above that? I think it's probably unlikely that we're above it, and I think we might be approaching it from below a little bit every year here.
Okay. And that makes sense to me, because as I was running the numbers, I found that if you look purely at the the correlation between 3-point attempt percentage and offensive efficiency, just points scored per possession, there's an extremely low correlation. But as you say, missing a 3-pointer doesn't help, but as you make them, obviously that makes a much bigger difference. And you see the correlation that I ran at the time, based on just this season's statistics alone. The correlation between 3-point attempts and offensive efficiency was only down around 0.09. When you multiply the 3-point attempt percentage by the 3-point make percentage, it jumps all the way up to 0.37. So you see a much stronger correlation when you're shooting a lot of them and shooting them well versus just purely shooting a lot of them. And sometimes I feel like maybe that's getting overlooked, just because you can demonstrate the efficiency of the 3-point shot by saying, if you hit 40% of your threes and 50% of your, say 16 jump shots, the 3-point shot is a much more efficient shot to take. But like you said, again, just shooting them alone doesn't necessarily help your offense any if you're not making them.
And one of the worst and most aggravating sins that I see on an individual player level is simply a guy who continues to jack up lots of threes and is shooting, below the Mendoza line, below 30%. Why are you doing that? And it inflicts great harm that you can see numerically on an offense. When somebody is a volume 3-point shooter and they're not making it, it just kills an offense. So you can there are a number of categories of error that you can make here, and that's certainly one of them.
Right. And so to bring it back to Kansas specifically, I was going over their numbers, just using hoopmath.com this morning. And if you look at their 3-point percentage, they're shooting 42.6% from 3-point range, which would work out to, for every 100 3-pointers they shoot, they would get about 127 points out of them. I was looking at their percentage of shots made at the rim, which is just over almost 63%. So that gives you around 126 points per 100 shots. So they're almost even.
Right.
But then something else that doesn't necessarily get taken into account is that we know that shots at the rim lead to a higher percentage of offensive rebounds than 3-pointers do. And obviously they lead to a lot more fouls and free throw attempts than 3-pointers do. You rarely see a foul on a 3-point attempt. So I almost wonder if the efficiency of the shot at the rim, if you can make those, obviously, isn't even higher than that. And if maybe that being good at shots around the rim isn't even more important on the grand scheme of things than being good at shooting threes.
Right. And, the other thing that strikes me as you state those numbers that are specific to Kansas is they are both absurdly good. Bill Self is in the position of, do I choose the Ferrari or the Lamborghini? Oh no, what do I do? Coaches would kill to have one of those numbers, and it's just a real good problem for him to have. I mean, that percentage of threes made, that's right up there with Michigan State. I mean, it's just an incredible season that Kansas is having. And, we're talking about the NCAA tournament #1 overall seed. So something's working for Self this season, definitely.
But I also wonder, is it really unique to Self? Because something I had said in my post was that if you take right now the median team in terms of field goal percentage at the rim, for out of every 100 shots, they'll score, should have that ready to go here. I'll start with the 3-pointers. If they take 100 3-pointers, the medium 3-point shooting team would score about 105 points, whereas the median shooting team right around the rim would score about 118 points at every 100 shots. So it seems like just in general, especially once you factor in the offensive rebounding and the foul rate, that shot at the rim is actually more efficient, at least at the college game. I haven't looked at the NBA numbers, but that shot at the rim actually leads to more points than the shots from behind the arc, unless you're just extremely good at shooting threes.
Right. And these are the two good categories of shots. And the macro point that could be made from that's backed up by your hard data is that this is what teams, besides rather spectacularly North Carolina, this is what teams are moving to. And in the past, I have flippantly called it the Fred Hoiberg approach, where your shots are dunks and threes, and there's nothing in between. Those are high value shots. The problem with shots at the rim is simply, getting them. It can be tough to do against a good defense. And the problem with threes is simply making them because you're far away. But there's a reason that teams value those shots. North Carolina famously is sticking with the 2-point jumper approach, and it works fantastic for them because they treat the other side of this equation that we're talking about per 100 shots. North Carolina gets to 100 shots quicker than anybody because they have always been fantastic at offensive rebounding, and now they're taking care of the ball. So volume is an under-discussed topic that I have been bringing up now and again, and that's how North Carolina is able to survive, even though they make analytic people literally go like this to their hair because they're taking 2-point jumpers. Conversely, places what I think is a correct value on these attempts you're talking about, shots at the rim and threes.
Right. And to be fair, I mean, we're talking about North Carolina and Kansas here, and the vast majority of college teams don't have the luxury of recruiting the players that those teams do. And so I think, I would guess at least that maybe the reason we see mostly mid-majors and low majors at the top of the 3-point attempt percentage scale, you've got a few teams, Wyoming, Akron, and the Citadel right now, taking more than half their shots from behind the 3-point arc. I would guess just because those teams are going to have a really hard time recruiting a point guard who can get to the rim whenever he wants, or recruiting a post player who has an arsenal of post moves and can get those shots right around the rim. It's probably a lot easier to find guys who can come off a ball screen and put up a 3-point shot than it is guys who are effective at getting to the rim and getting good looks.
Right. And this gets back to our earlier point about you can make a case that the former type of player that you're talking about who can get to the rim, that has always been correctly valued by coaches and onlookers. You can make an allied case that, however, shooting talent has probably been a little bit undervalued. Curry himself, couldn't get a nibble from an ACC school, and even to this day, it's important to be a member of the all-airport team if you want to get a scholarship to a good to a blue chip program. Whereas, if you can make the three, and that's the huge if, it doesn't particularly, matter what kind of visual package that ability comes in. It can be a relatively unprepossessing appearance of a guy. But if the 3-point shot goes in, that's worth 3 points, and it's a valuable commodity.
Yeah, and I do wonder if maybe in the coming years we're going to see more guys like a Doug McDermott, like a Jimmer Fredette, who end up at high major schools instead of, getting relegated to a place like Creighton or Brigham Young, where it's a little, where the level of recruiting is a little lower.
No, I think that major conference coaches and blue chip coaches are in on the secret, and they're going to start dragging those guys home. Absolutely.
Well, just to switch gears a little bit, I mean, with the timing of this show, we're just on the heels of Selection Sunday, which was yesterday, and there's a particular team that you wrote about on your site on Gasaway.com last week that I thought was interesting, where they got placed and who they got placed with, and that is Wichita State, a team that their metric profile doesn't necessarily match up with their resume. And I know I've discussed this with a lot of people who felt that their resume in and of itself was simply not good enough to be considered an NCAA tournament team. But then you look at Ken Pomeroy's rankings, and he's got them. Last I looked, he was 11th. I know they're pretty high. It looks like they're down to 12th now. But there's obviously a huge disparity there, and they end up getting in, but just as an 11 seed and having to play a play-in game, coincidentally against Vanderbilt, who was looking like they may end up being the highest-ranked Ken Pomeroy team ever to get left out of a tournament. At 13 losses in the SEC, they barely snuck in as an 11 seed. So now we're seeing the two kind of analytics darlings playing against each other, even though their resumes don't quite match up. Do you have any feeling on these two teams in particular, whether maybe they're aberrations and they're being overvalued for one reason or another by the ratings metrics like Ken Pomeroy's, or if it was simply a matter of, with Wichita State being without Van Vliet early on in the season when they racked up some of those losses, or maybe just variance or dumb luck when it comes to Vanderbilt having lost as many games as they have.
Yeah, the committee has committed analytic fratricide. Only one of those teams can survive. It's like when they pair two mid-majors against each other and everybody rightly goes crazy. It's like that means that only one's going to make it. Only one analytic darling, as you put it, can come out of there. Wichita State, I think in particular, has thrown humans and laptops alike a real nasty breaking curveball on the outside edge of the plate this season. It's not a traditional case where usually in recent years I've been able to say, hey, look, Greg Marshall's team didn't go undefeated this year and is not going to get a number one seed, but they're actually just as good as ever. And at first glance, you would think you would be able to make that case this season. But if folks have stopped by my site, they know that to kind of avoid the Van Vliet injury contingencies that you talk about, I really like to hone in on conference play. I like the balanced home and away schedules and the fact that the teams didn't create them themselves. And Wichita State this season spooks me because, they dropped a couple games. They lost at Illinois State, for goodness sake. So, that's one red flag that you don't have to be terribly diligent to pick up. They recorded a huge per possession scoring margin, which we know historically is a great indicator of future success. However, the thing that really gives me pause is that they compiled it by just adding an extra increment of points onto pre-existing blowouts. So in effect, they were winning games by 28 instead of just 18. We've seen this before, and the best example is Florida in 2013, which lost 4, I think, SEC games, was number 2 in KenPom on Selection Sunday. It's kind of a mixed case because in the event their bracket collapsed around them and they got Florida Gulf Coast in the Sweet 16, so they made it all the way to the Elite 8. They did get beat by Michigan by 20 at that point. So it was, I wanted to be able to say, I was right to be scared of this team, but I'm not sure you can really do that with somebody that gets to the Elite 8. But I'm just not convinced that the ability to win by 28 instead of 18 is going to be is going to come in handy against NCAA tournament quality opposition. And the last point I'd make real quickly about Wichita State. And this will hold true year after year after year. No fault of theirs, no fault of Greg Marshall. The Missouri Valley, number 1 in Division I with a bullet in terms of just fleeing from all offensive rebounds. They really do not believe in offensive rebounds. And I think my laptop and other laptops have a perceptual problem. They look at Wichita State's defense and it looks amazing, possibly even the best in the country. And a big part of that is simply Wichita State opponents saying no thank you to offensive rebounds. And I think we need to, walk our laptops back a little bit and say, that might not really be a defense as good as Kentucky in 2015. Let's look a little closer at this.
Right. And I think the other thing that really stands out about their defensive numbers is just how many more turnovers they create than how many they commit. They're looks like they're 11th in the country in turnover rate offensively, and then 5th in the country in turning over other teams over. But like you say, you have to look at the strength of the teams that they're playing, and the Missouri Valley obviously being a step down from major conference competition. It's hard to say. I mean, on the one hand, you look at, there are however many 9 other teams in the Missouri Valley, and none of them were able to turn over opponents that much. So clearly, Wichita State's doing something right there.
Right.
But it's hard to know exactly how much value to put on that, because again, the teams they're turning over are teams that they're able to overwhelm athletically, and how successful would they be in the Big 12 or the ACC in doing that.
Right, and it's a challenge as opposed to a categorical law. I mean, I can point to, and I know of, great teams from bad leagues, and that's an annual discussion. And they didn't have to play anybody. And the person in my position, looking at who's tracking possessions, is saying, yeah, I know they didn't play anybody, but that's just the cards they've been dealt. This is a legitimately great team. I am willing to make that argument. I just don't have the numbers and the feeling in my support this particular year on behalf of Wichita State the way I so often have in the past.
All right. And I know we're running out of time here, but one other thing I wanted to briefly touch on and with you, because I know it's something you've written about over the course of the season, is the rule changes this year, and what kind of impact they've had on the sport. Obviously, we've seen an uptick in scoring. We're seeing more fouls called. I've noticed that's really reduced the average possession time. It's hard to say how much of it's the fouls and how much of it is the shot clock. We've seen a greatly reduced possession time when it comes to just average time that the offense has the ball. I haven't looked at any data at this point. It'll probably be something I look at after the season's wrapped up, and have time to kind of parse through some of those numbers. But just to my eye, at least, it looks like we've seen an increase in foul calls away from the basket, but there hasn't really been a huge difference in calls, near the rim, in the post, and I really haven't seen much of a difference at all in how charges are called. So do you think that the uptick in scoring is purely a side effect of the shorter shot clock, or do you think that the fouls really have made a difference and offenses are playing more freely because of the new rules?
I do think that the increase in scoring has been mostly a function of the shot clock change. I do like to look at major conference play. Possessions, number of possessions per 40 minutes went up about 7 or 8%, which doesn't sound like much, but in a world where those things never change, that was appreciable, and scoring went up. But so that sounds like a direct correlation, but it's worth noting that the dog that did not bark here, the fear that people had before the fact, and it could have happened. I'm not saying it was not a legitimate fear. Offensive efficiency was not hurt by all these time-stressed offenses trying to adapt to this strange new 30-second world, or by defenses, pressing in the backcourt to deprive you of precious time. Those were legitimate concerns, and we did not see that. Offensive efficiency went up a hair. I don't suppose that was because of the clock or anything. I think that was just random occurrence. To me, the real story is it mostly didn't change. Offenses adapted, scored about the same number of points per possession, and then because there were more possessions, scoring went up. The foul issue is going to be in the eye of the beholder, and I'm a fan, you're a fan, and we have our preferences. Personally, I got in a good discussion with some fans on Twitter just the other night about Virginia and hard hedging, and the fact that when Virginia hard hedges, people say, "Ooh, look at that, that's great D." But if any other team tries to do that, they say that's a foul. It's like, I would like to see a world where everybody, plays great D and hard hedges, and it's not called a foul. So, it's great defense, and in the micro sense, you would say that might limit scoring. But aesthetically, I'd be seeing people playing basketball instead of a ref blowing a whistle and seeing free throws. That's my personal preference, and again, it's a question of equipoise. It's a question of getting to the right location where defenses aren't just reaching out and grabbing people. We can't have that, but at the same time, we're not watching a parade to the foul line. And the phrase you used was "to your eye," and that's exactly right. To my eye, this season it went pretty well. I've enjoyed the product all in all. And scoring is up. I think in general that's a good thing, and I like what I'm seeing. I'm encouraged.
All right. Are there any further rule changes that you'd like to see implemented in the near future? Or do you think we're at a good point right now to just kind of wait and see how things evolve from here, and then maybe make changes further down the line if needed?
This season, one timeout was taken away. I would like to continue that process and continue to reduce timeouts. So we've made an important start, and it really has improved. I'll be eager to see if amid the greater stakes of the NCAA tournament, coaches zealously hoard their timeouts to create that awful situation where the last minute of a close game is just a parade of timeouts after timeout. I hope that doesn't happen, but that would be the next rule change I would see is further salutary timeout reduction. I'm all in favor of that.
All right. All right, well, it looks like we're about out of time. I really appreciate you coming on, John. I'd love to have you on again if you're ever available, but I do appreciate your time today and going over these topics with me. I think they're things that are important to discuss and further parse, so we can really get to the bottom of what the data out there is trying to tell us when it comes to what is and isn't working in college basketball. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Sure. Thank you.